You might have seen this in the headlines. A border dispute that's been asleep for over a century in South America has suddenly and very loudly woken up. At the center of it all is a huge territory called Essequibo, which both Venezuela and Guyana claim as their own. Now, with billions of barrels of oil on the line, this old disagreement is threatening to become a very modern conflict. So let's dig in and figure out how a line drawn on a colonial map 100 years ago could spark a major crisis today.
For the longest time, this whole argument was about a massive, remote patch of jungle. Then 2015 happened, and, well, everything changed. ExxonMobil found a colossal amount of oil and gas, not on the land, but offshore in something called the Stabroek Block, an area of the ocean that falls right in the middle of the disputed zone. And we're not talking about a small find here. This was an absolute game changer.
And what a game changer it was. Just look at this number. This discovery turned Guyana, a pretty small nation of only about 800,000 people, into the fastest-growing economy on the entire planet. In 2022 alone, its GDP grew by a staggering 62.3%. All of a sudden, this old, dusty historical claim was tied to one of the biggest economic jackpots imaginable.
So, as you can imagine, Venezuela was watching all this happen right next door, and they decided it was time to make a move. President Nicolas Maduro's government held a national referendum, and the voters gave overwhelming support to the idea of just annexing the entire Essequibo region and turning it into a new Venezuelan state. The message couldn't have been clearer. Venezuela's claim was jumping off the old maps and into reality.
All right, so let's get into it. Section 1, a dispute reignited by oil. To really get a handle on what's at stake, we first need to look at the actual territory that's at the heart of all this tension.
First off, the Essequibo is vast. We're talking 159,000 square kilometers, which makes up more than 2/3 of Guyana's total land. But here's the thing, it's incredibly sparsely populated. Only about 128,000 people live there. And long before anyone was thinking about offshore oil, this place was already famous for its incredible wealth on land. Gold, diamonds, timber, you name it. By any measure, it's a massive prize.
Okay, on to our next section, the story of a border. To really understand why this is all blowing up right now, we have to jump in a time machine and go back more than a century to see how this border was drawn in the first place and why it's been a sore spot ever since.
So this whole saga really kicks off in the 1800s. In 1835, you have this explorer hired by the British, Robert Schomburgk, who draws a line on a map that just happens to give a huge chunk of land to the British Empire. Land that Venezuela, a newly independent country, believed was theirs. This whole thing eventually goes to an international tribunal in 1899, which mostly sided with Britain. But then decades later, a bombshell drops. In 1949, a memo from one of Venezuela's own lawyers is released, claiming the whole ruling was a corrupt political deal. That claim is what set the stage for the 1966 Geneva Agreement, where everybody sat down and basically admitted, okay, yeah, we still have a problem here.
Now this is what makes the history so fascinating. That Schomburgk line we just mentioned, it wasn't just one line. As you can see on this map, the British drew several versions over the years, and with each new version, the border pushed farther and farther west, deeper into territory Venezuela claimed. You can see how this would look like a slow-motion land grab, and it's really the historical root of Venezuela's entire grievance.
And here is the bombshell itself. This quote comes from Severo Mallet Prevost. He was an American lawyer working for Venezuela during the 1899 tribunal, and he wrote a secret memo telling his partners to only publish it after he died. In it, he claimed the whole verdict was just a political transaction between Great Britain and Russia. He was saying it wasn't a legal decision, but a dirty backroom deal. For Venezuela, this memo is the smoking gun, the ultimate proof that the entire border is illegitimate.
So that brings us to our next part. A deal to keep the peace. With Venezuela now armed with this explosive claim of fraud, all the parties came together in 1966 for a big diplomatic push, right as Guyana was on the verge of getting its independence.
Now this is probably the most crucial point to understand. The 1966 Geneva Agreement fundamentally changed everything. By signing it, Venezuela, Great Britain, and the soon-to-be independent Guyana all formally acknowledged that the dispute was not settled. The supposed finality of that 1899 decision was officially off the table. But here's the catch. The agreement didn't actually solve anything. It didn't draw a new line on the map. Instead, it just created a process. It set up a commission to find a practical and satisfactory solution. And if that failed, well, they just kicked the problem over to the United Nations. In essence, they punted the decision into the future, and that future is now. Okay, next chapter. ExxonMobil strikes black gold.
For about 50 years after that agreement, the problem just kind of simmered on the back burner. It was a diplomatic issue, but not a crisis. And then, one single discovery came along and poured rocket fuel on the fire.
And this, right here, illustrates the flashpoint perfectly. The oil was found in the Stabroek Block. Now, Guyana had given out exploration licenses for these waters, which it considers its own territory. But from Venezuela's perspective, this was an illegal operation happening in waters that were still very much under dispute.
Let's just pause on this number for a second. 11 billion barrels of oil and gas. This completely transformed the conflict from one about sovereignty and historical maps into a fight for one of the largest discoveries of fossil fuel wealth this century.
This discovery just fundamentally changed the stakes. Suddenly, those abstract lines drawn by explorers in the 19th century had a price tag attached to them. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. The fight was now about money, resources, and the incredible geopolitical power that comes with controlling them.
Which brings us to politics, players, and power. So how did this oil discovery lead us right to the brink of a major conflict? To understand that, we really need to look at what's motivating the key players involved today.
If you look at it from Venezuela's side, the Essequibo issue is a powerful political tool. It fires up nationalism, it's a great distraction from all the serious problems they have at home, and it's one of the very few things that the government and the opposition can actually agree on. For Guyana, though, the motivation is completely different. It's existential. This oil represents a chance to totally transform their country's future, and they are standing firm on what they believe is their legal, internationally recognized border.
And Venezuela's actions have gone way beyond just talk. After that referendum, Maduro's government passed a law to officially create the new state of Guayana Esequiba. They've set up a new military division for the area. They've even announced that they're going to start handing out their own licenses for oil and mineral extraction there. This is not just rhetoric.
As you'd expect, the rest of the world is watching very closely. The United States has come out in support of Guyana, even conducting joint military flights. Brazil has moved troops to its border with both countries, trying to keep things calm. The Caribbean community, CARICOM, is firmly in Guyana's corner. And then you have China, which is playing a fascinating double game. They are a key financial backer of Maduro. But at the same time, China's own state oil company is a major partner with ExxonMobil in Guyana's oil fields. This puts Beijing in a uniquely powerful and very complicated position.
All right, our final section, a verdict on the horizon. With tensions this high and diplomacy seemingly at a dead end, the fate of Essequibo is now shifting from a potential battlefield to a courtroom.
So, seeing no other way forward, Guyana took the case to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, back in 2018. They're asking the court to make a final, legally binding ruling that the 1899 border award is valid and should stand as the permanent boundary once and for all.
But here's the big twist. Venezuela's official position is that it doesn't even recognize the ICJ's authority to rule on this. Yet, they are participating in the case. They've submitted legal documents and argued their side before the judges. So they're basically fighting a legal battle in a court that they publicly claim has no power over them. It's complicated. And this really brings us to the final multi-billion-dollar question. The ICJ is going to issue a verdict, and under international law, that verdict is binding. But will that actually be enough? Can a court decision truly settle a conflict that's so deeply tangled up in national pride, a century of grievance, and now the incredible pull of black gold? That's the real question, and the answer is anything but clear.